just a few days before 9/11 because he was worried about people were voting in Florida after they found out they rigged the election and participated in 9/11.
Now, I've given you some facts up to now, and one more fact is, it is an absolutely clear fact, COG was instituted on September the 11th. It was. And a number of people left Washington. You know, we have these hollowed out mountains which have become the emergency headquarters. And those buildings were occupied for several weeks after 9/11 by about 100 bureaucrats. We don't really know what they're doing, but I speculate that what they were doing are all these things. They produced the Patriot Act out of nowhere, like a magician bringing a rabbit out of a hat, or Lyndon Johnson producing the Tonkin Gulf resolution out of a hat. They produced the Patriot Act, which I think is I'm speculating, an outgrowth of COG planning. The things that we know were planned for in the 1980s under COG, warrantless wiretapping, warrantless detention, possibly even massive detention, that hasn't happened yet, but planning for massive detention has already happened. And all of these, and in the Homeland Security homepage, when they're talking about it, they say the planning was done in 2001. Well, I think it was probably done in those hollowed out mountains. There is a very tight correlation between what Oliver North was accused of doing in the 1980s and what has actually happened in this country since 9/11. So, there is Congressman Kucinich wants to impeach Vice President Cheney. I think it's premature to impeach him. First of all, I know it wouldn't succeed, and secondly, I don't think the evidence is there myself. But I do think the evidence is there for a congressional committee to call in Vice President Cheney and say, what were you doing in that group in May? Did you have anything to do with this? The 9/11 Commission wasn't curious as to where this June 1st crazy ordinance came from. He should be asked to testify about that under oath, because Americans should understand that all kinds of people testified about 9/11 under oath to the 9/11 Commission, but Bush and Cheney came together so they wouldn't contradict each other and were allowed to testify not under oath. Well, I would say it's a matter of the very highest priority that Cheney testify for the first time under oath.
Whose specialty was suppression of unrest and dissent. Giuffrida, North, and George Bush began to turn FEMA into an instrument of domestic anti-terrorism.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason, and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent.
So all of these things come close, full circle when you look into authors like Peter Dale Scott or James Bamford, or any of the authors who have written about the narcotics and heroin and cocaine trafficking through our intelligence agencies and the black market that's been artificially supporting our stock market, which is the reason our dollar is so overinflated. And oh, by the way, these same guys took the gold that used to back our currency and left us basically with wallpaper. So when they choose to, they can pull the final rug out of America and crash the currency, go to the Amero, and install the North American Union.
Three amigos, Bush, Fox, and of course Canadian Prime Minister Paul Martin, were the originators of the so-called Security and Prosperity Partnership, which critics call nothing more than a North American Union.
I think one thing people who are dollar-based need to focus on is the Amero. That's the one thing that nobody's talking about that I think is going to have a big impact on everybody's life in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. If you Google it, you'll find out all about it.
Well, you could tell us a little bit more right now.
You always hear it on CNBC, don't you? The Amero is the proposed new currency for the North American community, which is being developed right now between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to make a borderless community, much like the EU, and the dollar, Canadian dollar, U.S. dollar, and the Mexican peso replaced by the Amero.
You really think that will get any leeway?
You may want to visit a couple of websites and see how far along it is. The Canadians are pretty upset about it, whereas the Americans, apart from the Texans, are the only people who know anything about it. The rest of the public's really sort of with their head in the sand on this one.
We're going to reschedule the talk about the Amero. The gentleman from London who told Ross that don't worry about the dollar. You should be more concerned with the Amero, which would be the equivalent of the euro, only it would include Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And nice. There are people that say that Bush, President Bush, Vicente Fox, and Prime Minister Martin have all have actually agreed to this. There is this guy's friend, and he's with Jeffries. I looked to see who he was with initially, and he's with Jeffries International. So,
Super NAFTA, and what the Bush administration is planning to lock NAFTA in even tighter in this country and across the continent. There's something called the Agreement on Security and Prosperity that is being negotiated by the Bush administration very quietly. No hearings are being held in this Congress. Most Americans have never even heard of the term. But it really is the successor to NAFTA. In addition to what it anticipates in terms of a new transportation corridor that will come up through Mexico and the American highway into the United States, it also includes the incentives to major corporations such as Ford Corporation of our country that is laying off people in our country, now an additional 30,000 jobs to be lost here in the United States, and Ford is planning to employ over 150,000 more workers in Mexico, announcing that it will be investing over $9.2 billion in Mexico. It is hard to explain to the American people how big that investment really is, but truly it will employ 15% or 1 of 7 of all unemployed people in Mexico.
It's been reported that you and your wife are in the globalist CFR, which is a Council on Foreign Relations, and I'd like to know if that is true, and also I'd like to know where you stand on the North American Union, which has been confirmed recently in the press. Ron Paul actually spoke about it, and the Congress has actually spent some money on it. This North American Union involves a union much like the European Union, only with Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and the possible merging of the money system into a piece called the Amero, which would actually strip the United States of some of its sovereignty and perhaps our rights. Where do you stand on that?
Well, first of all, I'm not... The Council on Foreign Relations, I don't know if I'm a official member. I've spoken there before. It basically is just a forum where a bunch of people talk about foreign policy. And so there's nothing... There's no official membership. I don't have a card or, a special handshake or anything like that. In terms of this North America, union, this has been something I know Ron Paul's talked about and people have been talking about. I have to say, with all due respect, that I see no evidence of this actually taking place. I think this has been something that has been ginned up in certain blogs and the internet.
Well, could you please explain to me why you voted to reauthorize the Patriot Act, which is the worst attack on civil rights of Americans? And we do now know that George Bush's fabricated reasons to go to war were fabricated, so we do not need the Patriot Act to keep us safe.
Let me tell you what... first, it's not actually true that the Patriot Act was the worst. Most of the problems that we have had in civil liberties were not done through the Patriot Act. They were done through executive order by George W. Bush.
When I heard Barack Obama the other day asked about his membership in the Council on Foreign Relations and NAFTA and the North American Union and stuff like that, he poo-pooed it like it was some conspiracy theory, okay? Well, it's true, and I've got people in Congress testifying about the NAFTA superhighway and the pipelines and all the stuff that they're doing, and the reason that the dollar in America is now with the Canadian dollar again is because they're thinking about changing it over to the Amero. And if you look up on YouTube or on Google, you can see respected financial people talking about these changeovers in currency. So if you have a bunch of Federal Reserve dollars and you think you're protected right now, I got news for you. Unless you own the new currency, you're in the same boat as the rest of us.